Dragon Ball Sparking Zero is on the way, so let's revisit the entire Budokai Tenkaichi series. I've got a ton of awesome videos lined up to come out soon, so if you like this kind of stuff, please consider subscribing and liking the video. It helps me a ton and makes it more possible for me to keep making these kinds of videos. Alright, let's go all the way back to Dragon Ball Z Budokai Tenkaichi for the PlayStation 2, originally called Dragon Ball Z Sparking in Japan. Unlike the preceding Budokai series, a side-view fighting game, the Budokai Tenkaichi series is a fully 3D arena battler, where you can move in all directions on huge stages with some destructible elements in the environment. Before we go straight into the gameplay, we have to talk about the CG opening sequence, because man are these sequences sick. It's this huge montage of the Z fighters fighting basically every major villain from the Z series. To take it a step further, there's some ridiculously over-the-top dimension warping stuff too, and while you'd think it'd end up with this huge Goku versus Kid Buu blast sequence, nah. Now Goku and Vegeta have to fight because why not? But you know exactly what we're actually here to see. Oh yeah, there it is! There's the moment of all moments. This looks so goofy. God, I love this intro though. The only nitpick that I have is why does everybody look like they took a bath in some grease right before this fight? They're all shiny for some reason. In-game visuals, on the other hand, look shockingly great for a game from 2005. There's the cel-shaded look that we see in most Dragon Ball games, nothing that would really surprise you, but there's some added details that really elevate the presentation, like the destructible environments, character outfits that get damaged in real time, characters having unique facial expressions, and character-specific dialogue before and after fights. And God, you know how much I love character-specific dialogue. Plus, all the menus have animated and dynamic elements, including a unique character talking to you on each menu. They even did this with the options menu of all things. I like the way that while the characters are cel-shaded, the environments are mostly flat-shaded, making the characters stand out more against the environments, which is great since the first and foremost focus is on the characters. Moving on to the gameplay, let me quickly explain how these games work. After you select a character in a stage, you're put right on the battlefield with your opponent. You can move in any direction, fly up and down with R1 and R2, charge your ki gauge with L2, punch with square, fire ki blasts by tapping triangle or fire a charged ki blast by holding it, guard with a circle, or use special moves by holding the ki charge button and pressing the button combo assigned to that ability. It's simple and it works. You can pick up this game pretty fast and figure it out probably within like 30 seconds. But there's some real depth here, not only to the tactics in battle, but with the skill customization too. First, at the beginning of each battle in this game, you have to find your opponent and lock onto them by holding down L1. If you're locked on, you automatically fly toward the opponent when you hold forward, and of course, ki blasts and specials will automatically target locked on enemies too. If you're not locked on, you can freely move around in any direction and kinda sorta explore the stages, but they are deceptively small with these invisible borders that become visible once you get close to them. So I'd say 99% of your time in battles will be locking onto an opponent and flying toward them if you're not already in close quarters or setting up for like a special or something. Slowly flying toward an opponent is slow and boring though. Tap X and you'll dash quickly toward the opponent, and if you want to really spice it up, hold down the ki charge button to use an even faster and flashier dash that destroys the environment at the cost of some ki. If you hold down the attack button as you close in on the enemy, you can break out a preemptive charged move as you close the distance. When you're up close to an enemy, you can mash square to dole out combos, which is probably not a surprise, but holding down square gives you a more powerful wind-up punch at the cost of speed, while tapping triangle or X in the middle of a combo activates a stun move that basically keeps an opponent stun locked for a shockingly long time if you time it right. Once you've ended your combo, you can knock the opponent far away and then push after them with a dragon homing rush to follow it up with more combos, or if you're feeling spicy, a special move. Every character on this beefy roster has their own pre-made set of skills, and you can access the skill list anytime from the pause menu. Each skill is mapped to different button combinations and includes things like blast attacks, rush attacks, and transformations. Each special skill uses up some of the ki from your ki gauge, but some specials, called favorite techniques, use a secondary blue gauge under your ki gauge. Unlike the ki gauge, this favorite gauge can't be manually charged, and you have to wait for it to increase over time. I think the favorite technique gauge is meant to be a sort of bottleneck or inhibitor to stop you from going straight into advanced abilities right at the beginning of the match, but you can still pull out a lot of garbage really fast by quickly charging the ki gauge anyways. Speaking of the ki gauge, there's technically two of them. The first is your standard ki gauge, which this game for some reason refers to as vitality, and it's represented by a yellow bar. If you keep charging past the the initial bar, you get a secondary key bar, and filling this bar puts you into max power mode, but only if you have at least one full favorite technique gauge. In this mode, your secondary key gauge begins to automatically deplete over time, but it enables you to use your strongest abilities. On top of that, you have essentially infinite ki for basic movement and energy blasts for the duration of max power mode, but using any special abilities will automatically take you out of the mode. Guarding works as you'd expect. You can block attacks, specials, and ki blasts. If you time it right and tap the guard button right when a ki blast connects with you, you can deflect it. This adds a layer of strategy and depth to what otherwise would just be a spammy energy attack system with little cost or thought to it. Guarding isn't infallible though. Charged melee attacks can break it, as can grabs, but another defensive maneuver is the vanish. With good timing and at the cost of some ki, you can tap the circle button, which is the guard button, to do a vanishing teleport move during enemy attacks, and even during your own combos too if you want. This makes keeping a little bit of ki in reserve kind of important since it's an invaluable way of stopping an onslaught of attacks. Whenever you're knocked over or in a stunned state, you have to mash buttons to get back up. I don't actually know if the speed of the button mashing affects how fast you get up though. Similarly, if you're knocked away by a charged melee attack, you're given a prompt of buttons to press in order, and if you do it successfully, you can instantly recover and charge back toward the opponent. I know I've been talking about basic game mechanics for forever, but we're almost done, I promise. This game has two struggle mechanics: a rush struggle where two characters use rush attacks at the same time, and a beam struggle where two characters use beam attacks at the same time. Both of them work the same way. You have to quickly spin the analog stick faster than the opponent, though it's a bit more obvious to tell who's winning a beam struggle rather than the rush struggles. Oh, and you can click in the right stick to taunt, but there's no tangible benefit to doing so, and even the game's tutorial tells you as much. One big thing that I haven't mentioned yet is the Z item system, accessible from the Evolution Z menu that can be found on the main menu or within character selection. Through various means, usually completing sections of the Z Battlegate mode, you earn Z items, and these Z items can be equipped to customize each character to increase their overall stats. Some characters have more slots than others, and some Z items are locked to specific characters. The Z items that you can use are broken into two types: ability type and support type. The ability type items usually have a flat stat boost, like health, ki, attack power, defense, special technique power, finishing move power, and more. There's also some that increase the number of equipment slots for the selected character, but ironically this is at the cost of one of those very slots that you're trying to increase. Support type Z items have more specialized effects and are usually named after something less generic from the series that identifies their effects or the characters that can use them, like I Am Champion, which recovers only Hercule's vitality over time, or Warrior Race, which has a vitality recovery effect but can only be used by Saiyan characters. This Z item system makes it so that every single character and character form on the roster can have unique stats and be built and customized as you wish, and the variety that provides makes the game feel a lot more almost RPG-like, since you're slowly building up your character's strength through getting more and more of a variety of these items. You can earn more and more of these through playing the Z Battlegate mode or fusing them together with specific combinations in the item fusion menu. I mentioned this earlier, but this game's roster is pretty hefty for being the first in the series. The character selection menu is cycled through left and right, and if available, you can select different forms of each character by tapping up and down. The selection here includes characters from every main arc of Dragon Ball at the time, going from Tao all the way to Baby Vegeta, along with movie-only characters like Bojack and Janemba too. There's some obvious big players missing here, but it's a nice spread covering most of the heavy hitters. The only real big miss to me here is that for how many Gokus there are, there's no GT Child Goku. Unfortunately, there's no in-game transformations outside of stuff like Kaioken, so brand new forms with different abilities like Super Saiyan or fusions are treated as entirely separate characters on this game's roster. Oh, and there's Great Ape forms here too. I enjoy the little details that some of these characters have, like how some characters have special key charge animations with Boo's steam whistles, or how some characters have outright modified lore-accurate mechanics, like the androids being unable to manually charge their ki. If there's one thing this game doesn't lack, it's variety in the characters. Anyways, once you've selected a character in any mode, you can use the standard vanilla version of the character or your customized Z item version. If you're playing duel or a mode with selectable stages, you're then in, the stage select. Stage selection in this game is a big 3D ring, and you get little 3D representations of each stage and a short video playing in the background, which makes me like this game's presentation even more. And I think that about covers it for the basic gameplay overview. This gameplay is solid on a foundational level, and every future game kind of builds on this game's foundation. There's things that are adjusted or added or removed, but the principles remain the same for the most part. One thing I'm not a huge fan of is the lock-on system, though maybe I'm spoiled by newer games doing this for you automatically, but it just doesn't make sense to me that your character has no idea where their opponent is, even if they're standing 10 feet away. Sometimes you'll lose your lock-on and your character will have no idea where to go. That, and the camera is placed firmly behind your character at the beginning of the game until you lock on, severely limiting how much you can actually see of the environment. Plus, the camera camera can be kind of finicky and hard to handle when you're up against environmental walls and stuff anyways, but maybe this is just an innate flaw with 3D arena games. Anyways, let's talk about the modes, all available on the dynamic and fun main menu with Goku talking to you as you scroll over each menu option. The modes are Z Battle Gate, Ultimate Battle, World Tournament, Dueling, Practice, Evolution Z, Options, and Character Illustrations. Z Battle Gate is the game's story mode, broken down into different chunks themed after different Dragon Ball story arcs. There are battle gates covering almost every major arc, starting with the Saiyan Saga all the way through some of the Baby Saga in GT. There's also some movie arcs and an OG Dragon Ball arc sprinkled in too. Well, sort of, since some of these have like what-if elements in them, like the OG Dragon Ball arc actually being a weird time travel de-aging scenario. Fortunately, there is some great character-specific dialogue in the battle intros, like this fun dialogue between Krillin and Goku.
Alright, Krillin, let's fight!
What the? Goku? You're a kid again!
And if you go easy on me because of that, then you're gonna be the one that walks away hurt.
Whatever you say, Goku. Let's get it on.
There's these entire arcs dedicated to what-if scenarios where the arc's villain is the playable character, and it plays out a scenario where the villain wins in the end. Know what this means? Exclusive character-specific dialogue that you can't see anywhere else. Like this super sad line from Krillin when you defeat him as Frieza.
It's no use. I'm just no match for him. Darn it. I wanted to get married at some point.
I know I could have picked a fight that wasn't technically still canon, but we gotta pay some respect to our boy Krillin, right? When you start an arc, you get a small narrated introduction backed with in-game footage. Then you fight a series of battles to progress through the arc, with a final similarly narrated ending sequence followed by the full credits sequence, no matter which arc or saga you're on. And I mean the full credits sequence, every single time. The battles themselves all have clear requirements, which can include just winning the fight or special conditions like winning the fight in specific ways, such as ring outs in the World Tournament or winning with a specific ability. I think this is just an okay story mode overall. I like the number of arcs and scenarios, but most of the storytelling is done through these text crawls, and the pre-battle dialogue is nice, just super short. Fortunately, if you're playing a game like this, you probably already have a general knowledge of the story of Dragon Ball. Ultimate Battle mode is a sort of pseudo-survival mode where your progress is measured on a per-character basis. It's broken down into two sub-modes, Super Warriors 100 ranking and Warrior Training. Warrior Training is just a straight-up survival mode where you play fight after fight with your health not fully recovering between each fight. It's a novel mode, but the real meat is obviously the Super Warriors 100 mode. In this mode, you select a character and you put them through 100 battles, starting from the bottom and increasing your rank and your total points as you progress. Winning a battle increases your rank by 1, while clearing certain conditions in battles increases your score points. The conditions include things like winning within a minute, finishing the battle with certain moves, and getting perfect wins. Now, if you win a battle 5 times in a row, you can get challenged by a character a few spots ahead in the ranking, and if you beat them, you get to jump forward a few places to their ranking and skip some fights. This mode generally gets progressively harder and harder, though it does feel like some fights have weird difficulty spikes and then are followed by slightly easier fights, but that could just be an enemy AI quirk too. Next up is the World Tournament mode, and this is a tournament bracket mode where you select a character and then you select which tournament you'd like to take on. The difficulty options are Novice, Adept, and Advanced, and each one has one additional round for a total of up to 5. While this mode is just a simple tournament bracket where you have to win fights to progress through the brackets, the way it's presented is a lot of fun. First off, the tournament announcer has a ton of dialogue in between every round, and you see a representation of brackets as the characters move up and are knocked out too. And of course, there's that extra fun rule where if you touch the ground outside of the tournament stage, you instantly lose the match. This adds a whole extra layer of thought and strategy to the tournament fights, and while you can exploit this to cheese fights, it can also trip you up almost instantly if you're not careful. Guess how I know that? There's one additional world tournament in the form of the Cell games. This is presented similarly to the standard tournaments, but the Cell games are actually announced by Cell himself, which is incredibly charming and thoughtful. They could have easily just made a slightly harder normal tournament and slapped the name Cell games on it and called it a day, but they actually went above and beyond to change it up here. These fights take place in the Cell games arena, and the enemy AI feels quite a bit tougher. And since you can't disqualify via ring outs this time, you have to endure the fights and win fair and square. The final fight is against Cell, and it's pretty damn tough, I'll be real with you. Though I might also just be bad, but I can say it's definitely tougher than any of the previous tournament fights I'd done up to this point. The World Tournament mode overall is normally the kind of mode that I wouldn't care very much about in a fighting game, but there's just something the way Dragon Ball Z games handle these modes that I find so much more endearing and entertaining. It might be because World Tournaments are an integral part of Dragon Ball's identity, so obviously that helps too. Moving on to the next mode, we've got the Dueling mode. This mode lets you choose a fight between two characters on whatever stage you want, and the options are player versus CPU, player versus player, and CPU versus CPU. I totally get the appeal of player versus CPU fights where you can make whoever you want to fight whenever you want, and also player versus player since local multiplayer in a game like this is a no-brainer. But be real with me for a second, who is doing the CPU versus CPU fights in these games? Who is that for? Are there hardcore CPU versus CPU players? Are you out here grinding those sweet CPU matches? Get in the comments, I want to hear your story. Even Vegeta doesn't sound enthused about it.
Have the computer fight itself. Wow, sounds like fun.
Though, when I put Hercule vs. Hercule to get footage of this, they did spend the first minute of the fight just kind of chucking grenades at each other, and then the rest of the fight almost just avoiding each other entirely. Maybe this mode is worth it. The final mode, not counting the self-explanatory training mode, is the Character Illustrations mode. This mode is a fun little encyclopedia of every playable character in the game. Each entry includes not only a render of the character, but who voiced them, and a full, usually pretty detailed bio too. I love modes like this, especially when every bio is pretty lengthy. Though, I don't know if I'd go as far as calling these images illustrations, since they're more like renders or screenshots of 3D models. Also, I'm pretty sure Sean Schemmel doesn't voice Kid Goku. So, as someone who's played every Tenkaichi game extensively for years, it's kind of hard to rank the first game overall. Like, in a vacuum, it's an excellent game that can definitely stand up on its own, but I'm also cursed with the knowledge that the sequels do so much more than this game does. Would I recommend playing the first Tenkaichi today? I guess so, yeah, but only if you're interested in the highly specific story mode stuff that I think only exists in this game. But even then, you can probably find comparable content in future games in the series anyways. Either way, this game lays a really solid foundation for the franchise, and if this game had never gotten sequels, I still think it'd be looked back on fondly today. Dragon Ball Z Budokai Tenkaichi 2, called Sparking Neo in Japan, was released for the PlayStation 2 and the Nintendo Wii. This intro is very similar, at least in concept, to the first games, which is basically just this huge crossover battle between most of the major players. This one gets rid of the weird grease all over everyone, but I think the overall fidelity seems a bit lower, but maybe it's just my imagination. Either way, I do prefer the first opening and think it was a bit more hype and well put together overall. This one just kind of ends. By the way, I quickly want to clarify something.
Dragon Ball Z Budokai Tenkaichi 2. Tenkaichi 2! Budokai Tenkaichi 2!
The in-game visuals on the surface really don't seem that much different, and if you're not comparing them directly side by side, I wouldn't blame you if you said they looked exactly the same. But this game actually does have some improved environmental detail in the stages, along with some small improvements to the characters and their animations, it seems. Plus, the camera now starts at a sort of off-center angle instead of directly behind you, so that's a huge improvement on its own. The menus are still top-notch and even more dynamic, so much that I'd call it an across-the-board upgrade. You've still got characters talking to you on every option, but I think the overall use of dynamic elements makes them feel even more alive than the last game, and that's honestly a feat given how dynamic the last game was. As far as gameplay, most of the basic mechanics are the same, there's just been a few adjustments and additions. First and foremost, the game in general just feels better somehow. This is gonna be a running thing, but I can't really put my finger on it. The easiest example that I can give is that stuff like dragon homing feels smoother and more responsive, and just more natural to use, almost like it had some kind of under-the-hood timing change or something. The Z item system has been adjusted too. Every character's overall stats are now indicated by a level, and characters can earn experience, but equipping Z items increases their level too. The range of stats are similar, but the actual stat numbers have been increased significantly. This is reflected in the Z items for stat boosts, which now have ranges of anything from 1 to at least 14. Additionally, the HUD has been adjusted to show characters as having more than one health bar now. The lowest bar is orange, the second is yellow, the third is green, and so on. Another change is that some specials, usually beam specials, can now be charged for more potency by holding the button. So I can fire off a faster but slightly weaker Kamehameha, or I can hold the triangle button to charge it for a riskier but more powerful blast. One of my favorite changes is kind of a twofold change. First, battles can now be tag battles, where there's more than one character taking part in the fight. Tag characters are shown in the left corner under your HUD and have a tag meter that fills up over time. When it's full, you can use a button combo to tag that character into the fight. If a character is defeated in battle, the next character in the team will automatically come out to replace them. The tag out function has a cool new capability though, the ability to create teams strings of compatible characters for in-battle fusions. The fusion can be initiated at the cost of some of your favorite ability gauge, which this game is now calling blast stocks, I guess. Anyways, if a character duo has multiple fusions, you can choose which one that you want to fuse into, and there's even a special animation depending on the fusion too. For example, if you want to fuse Goku and Vegeta to get Vegito, they get a scene where they use the Potara earrings, while the Gogeta fusion shows them doing the fusion dance. The developers easily could have just had these fusion characters tag in, but instead they went out of their way to include these scenes, and this is one of the things that I absolutely love about Dragon Ball games in general. In addition to fusions, you can now use form transformations in battle too. You can still start the battle as any form that you want from the character select, but it's nice that you can choose to power up in-game now. As for a couple of smaller changes, the knock-away button combo things are gone, and the button mashing to recover is limited to just circle to get up now. Also, a few special moves now cause enough damage to completely destroy the stage, with a special scene and everything. Of course, since this game is also on the Wii, there are some Wii-specific control changes. The Wii version has compatibility for both Wii remotes and classic controllers, and even apparently GameCube controllers. I tested the Wii remote controls, and I'm gonna be real, they were pretty rough. I don't know if I was doing something wrong, but the blast abilities all require you to swing your arms in and out to activate them, and the basic button controls were also just kind of wonky and just didn't feel super good to me. I think for a Dragon Ball game, it's important for the abilities to be easy to access and responsive, and I don't know if movement controls have much of a place in games like this. Moving on to the character roster, it's been expanded a little bit. Not only are there some outright new characters, but there's also quite a few new character forms, including grade 8 forms for a bunch of characters. Additionally, each character with a fusion can now access that fusion from the character select slot. This means that you can see the same fusion on multiple character slots, but I believe the Z items for that fusion is based on the character that you have selected at the time. One more note about characters. The non-American Wii versions of the game include a few extra characters for some reason. I think these characters end up showing up in Tenkaichi 3's American version, but otherwise they're completely off limits to the American releases. On to the modes, this game has Dragon Adventure, Ultimate Battle Z, Dragon Tournament, Dueling, Ultimate Training, Evolution Z, Item Shop, Data Center, and Dragon Library. Dragon Adventure mode is the new story mode for this game because they've gotta give it a new name every single time. This story mode has a full overworld for each saga, which means that you can visit various locations on the map and visit areas to talk to NPCs, and sometimes you can even find stuff like Dragon Balls lying around in the areas, making it one of the fastest and easiest ways to find them if you know where to look. By the way, Dragon Balls can be used to summon Shenron and get like extra items and stuff. Anyways, when you go to a marked location, it initiates a cutscene with voice acting. These scenes aren't super animated or anything, and mostly just have people standing around, but I still prefer it to just introduction dialogue at the beginning of each battle. While you can do all of the standard Dragon Ball story stuff, the standout content to me in the first game was the what-if scenarios. And while it feels like this game has fewer of them, I think my absolute favorite one that I've seen is in this game, and it's gotta be the Fateful Brothers scenario. In this one, Raditz loses his memory shortly after arriving on Earth and completely forgets his mission. This leads to him actually befriending Goku and the Z-Warriors briefly, and while he eventually regains his memory, it leads to a pretty big character development moment with a shockingly emotional finale. This made me question whether Raditz actually could, in theory, be redeemed, and if he was, does he have the same potential as Goku? Could a Z-Fighter Raditz be one of Universe 7's strongest warriors? Will we ever know? Anyways, before I go on a full tangent with theories and stuff, this story mode is a lot more fleshed out than the first games, and a huge improvement with a wealth of content to me. It is slightly disappointing that there's less focus on the what-if stories though. Dueling mode returns, but this time has 3 battle types: single, tag, and free battles. Single battles are the standard 1 versus 1 battles like we're used to. Tag battles are battles where you can choose 2 characters that can be tagged in and out. And free battle allows you to create teams of 5 characters at a time, but otherwise it works just like the tag battle mode. A fun addition to the dueling mode though is the ability to change the battle announcer in the settings. You can choose between the Ox King, Supreme Kai, Shenron, and 3 standard announcers. Item Shop is a brand new mode where you can buy and sell Z items outright with Zenny, both this game and the Dragon Ball world's currency. Not every Z item in the game can be found in the shop, but there's still quite a few to choose from, and since there's so many characters, I found myself stocking up on a large number of some of the basics. You can find the item shop in both the main menu and usually on the game map during the Dragon Adventure mode. Also, if you have save data from the first Tenkaichi on your memory card, you can actually go to the data center menu and collect 100,000 Zenny right off the bat. In this menu, you can also input passwords to import customized characters that someone else has already made. Evolution Z mode returns, and it's still an integral part of the gameplay. This time around, there's a lot more items to choose from with a ton of new and different effects, like the ones that can simultaneously increase both your skill slots and a stat at the same time. You can now set a character's logic. According to a random forum post I read online, these are AI behavior changes, and powerful focuses on close-up attacks, technical focuses on long-range special special abilities. I'm gonna be honest, I don't actually know how to verify this. Either way, the addition of character levels and a wider range of possible stats makes customizing characters feel a lot more in-depth this time around, and only expands the pseudo-RPG feel that the Z item mechanic adds to the series. Ultimate Battle Z mode is a mode with a selection of courses, each containing a series of at least 5 progressively more difficult fights. There's a varied selection of courses, and they're usually themed, like the Movie Villains course or the Ginyu Force course. Each course also has battle conditions, varying from courses with survival-type battles to courses that don't allow you to use customized characters. After each battle, you're graded on various stats like HP left and combo length, and earn points based on your overall performance. There's some extra Super Smash Bros. Style bonus points awarded too, like points for activating max power mode and throwing the enemy. After the stats, you see your character's overall earned experience and you move on to the next fight. Dragon Tournament mode is an expanded series of World Tournament sub-modes. There's the World Tournament, Cell Games, and World Martial Arts Big Tournament. World Tournament is nearly identical to the standard World Tournament we saw in the first game, just with the addition of one more difficulty level. There's been a nice presentation upgrade with flashier animations and an overall nicer look, and the tournament announcer is still as charming as ever. Cell Games is similar to the standard World Tournament, but has the same differences as the last game, except this time it has its own selectable difficulties and tournament lengths. World Martial Arts Tournament is Hercule's tournament, and this is the best tournament because the final match is against Hercule himself! Except unfortunately when I played it, he had to bow out at the last second due to an unforeseen stomachache, so I was declared winner by default. I guess our fight will have to wait for the next time, but it's definitely there, for sure. Dragon Library mode is a gallery mode and broken down into 3 subsections: character illustrations, dragon text, and sound select. Character illustrations is back, and this time the explicitly not illustrated 3D models are actually viewable, and you can rotate them and zoom in and out of them. When you're looking at a character model, you can tap square to play a random voice line. The bios are back and are just as long too. This is actually an improvement from the last game's version of the mode, and while it's still just a novelty, I love it when games include stuff like this. Dragon text includes a recap of every major arc, including the movies. It's kind of cool that they included this too, though you can sort of get the gist of it from the Dragon Adventure mode. Still, Videl has this voiced short blurb about each one, and sometimes maybe you just want to lean back and, read, I guess, in your video games. Sound Select is just a music player where you're able to listen to various tracks from the game, though I do think this is a good time to mention an elephant in the room with the music from these games. The Japanese sparking versions of almost every game in this video have soundtracks that are made up of classic tracks from like the TV show. Usually they're orchestral, not counting the main themes being played in the introduction sequences. However, the English versions include entirely different soundtracks composed by Kenji Yamamoto, a composer who did a ton of Dragon Ball game soundtracks for about as long as Dragon Ball games existed up to this point. He would continue composing the soundtracks until it was found that many of the tracks in these games were, at the very least, questionable from a plagiarism standpoint. That being said, I hate to say it, but even with the plagiarism accusations, which I 100% can personally hear, though I would never explicitly say it's plagiarism, I still think these soundtracks are insanely iconic. This is not an endorsement of plagiarism, and it's entirely possible that I enjoy these soundtracks so much because they may or may not have taken a lot from other iconic songs. But either way, these songs are just super nostalgic for me, and while they may be tainted, I think that most people who grow up with these versions of the games with these songs still probably have fond memories of the music. Anyways, Tenkaichi 2 is what I'd consider an improvement in most aspects. The gameplay feels smoother and better to control, there's more characters, more stages, more modes, and the Evolution Z character growth systems were expanded in a way that makes sense. The biggest overall improvement in my eyes is just how much they added to the story mode with the free roaming stuff, let alone just the volume of content and scenes that were added into it. Plus, with an overall increase to what was already a pretty stellar presentation and style from the first game, I think Tenkaichi 2 excels in just about every way and rises above and beyond its predecessor. I think the only thing I'd really say was lost was some of the special what-if scenarios from the first game, but there's so much to do here already, I can pretty easily look past that. Dragon Ball Z Budokai Tenkaichi 3, called Sparking Meteor in Japan, was released for the PlayStation 2 and Wii. This intro feels more like it's trying to tell a story in a way. It's still super stylized and mostly just a montage of different characters fighting, but the real win here is that we get another goofy Goku and Vegeta face when they do the fusion dance. This opening just seems to take itself a little less seriously than the others though, and while that's charming, there's a lot fewer characters involved this time, which is kind of a bummer. Overall, this one really feels like the weakest so far. The visuals themselves in-game, well, this time I'll be honest, I actually can't tell much of a difference from the last game. That doesn't mean I don't prefer this, though, I can't put my finger on it, but the camera feels a lot more dynamic and smooth somehow in the fights, and that's not even touching on the dynamic camera improvements in the story mode. Plus, it feels like every character has more more unique animations too. As for gameplay changes, this one went more for just adding things rather than actually changing anything. This is basically Tenkaichi 2 with a bunch of new stuff on top. For starters, the camera now automatically locks onto the opponent at the beginning of matches, which is a huge improvement in my opinion. They've kept the ability to charge some beam attacks, but now most super attacks have a short window while the attack activates where you can press a button combination to boost the power of the move. There's a new defensive technique called Sonic Sway that lets you automatically dodge rush attack combos if you press the button combination at the right time. I didn't find myself using it much, but it does look really flashy when you pull it off. There's a pretty hefty number of new characters, especially if you missed out on the Tenkaichi 2 region exclusive characters. There's also quite a bit more original Dragon Ball representation, which makes sense given the inclusion of a Dragon Ball story arc. On top of new characters, there's new stages, and some stages include time of day options. But the coolest part of this is that in the nighttime stages with the moon visible, Saiyan characters can now do a Great Ape transformation mid-battle, which includes a whole transformation animation and everything. This isn't even something I ever would have expected them to add in a game like this, so seeing that kind of addition speaks volumes to how much these developers must enjoy Dragon Ball. There's some more small gameplay changes, but at this point they really just found the formula for what works and feels good, and this makes it the most solid feeling game so far. It's not a huge leap from Tenkaichi 2, but it can feel like a big jump if you came straight from, I don't know, the first Tenkaichi. Getting right into the modes, there's Dragon History, Ultimate Battle, Dragon World Tour, Duel, Evolution Z, Ultimate Training, Data Center, Character Reference, and, options. The Wii version has an additional network battle mode for online play, but unfortunately this doesn't work anymore. Dragon History mode is, drumroll, put in your guesses now, the story mode. The presentation of this story mode has had a huge upgrade in my opinion, at least as far as the cutscenes go. While the scenes are still mostly just characters standing around, there's a lot of dynamic camera angles now, and the scenes last a little bit longer. But that's not all. Now the characters will talk during battle, making it feel so much more immersive. Plus, when you initially start a saga, you get that classic DBZ announcer that at least I remember from my childhood, and he does the entire introduction voiceover, unlike the last two games.
The evil Saiyan Raditz has appeared. Goku and Piccolo are forced to team up to face this powerful enemy. The Z-level battle has now begun.
This game is also broken up into sagas, but it's a bit more streamlined and the sagas are pretty clearly named. There's a fun touch in that every saga has a character on its scenario selection screen who not only comments on the scenario, but can sometimes have multiple voice lines too. And some of the characters just make sense, like Hercule representing the Buu saga. Sometimes in this menu, you can get straight up dialogue between two different characters too, like this time that Goku and Hercule talk about the Buu saga. And with Tenkaichi 2, I was starting to get a bit tired of the menus, sometimes stopping me from smoothly navigating because I had to, wait for character dialogue, but things like this are super charming and I really just can't get mad at it. There's a nice selection of sagas to play here, including a fleshed out original Dragon Ball saga and a whole What If saga. There's even the staff credits saga. My favorite saga is still probably the What If saga though. There's some really fun stuff in here, and a highlight for me is the scenario where the Saiyans revolt against Frieza, leading to this huge gauntlet showdown that involves everybody from Bardock to King Vegeta. So while there is dialogue during fights, there's also these new scripted sequences that can take place during the fights, usually for an iconic moment from the series or a climactic attack or team up. Sometimes these cutscenes will have a character use a final ability that ends the fight instantly too. This is really cool at first, but it does seem like some of the fights are less winnable because they expect you to end it with the cutscene. The final GT saga fight against Sin Shenron, for example, has Goku charging a spirit bomb in the mid-fight scenes, and while you are fighting him directly the whole time, he has so much HP and takes so little damage that beating him without relying on the cutscene feels impossible, if not just really, really tedious. Obviously, the whole big overworld exploration element is completely removed, so it's kind of give and take with this mode. I do like Dragon History overall though, and how fleshed out it is. And while it does stand on its own, I do think the ideal mode would be one that takes the content from Tenkaichi 3 and the presentation with the world map and stuff from Tenkaichi 2 and just mashes them together. But they are good in their own ways. Next up is Ultimate Battle mode, which has a handful of new little challenge modes including Sim Dragon, Mission 100, Survival, and Disc Fusion. Sim Dragon is a sort of bite-sized RPG mode where you're given 10 days to build up your character's stats to prepare for a fight. If you win the fight, your total stat limit is increased and you're given another 10 days. On each day, you can take one action before moving on to the next day. The options are training, exploring, resting, and eating a sensu bean. Training has 3 options, 2 that can increase your attack and defense stats at the cost of some health, and 1 that can increase both a lot but at the cost of way more health. Exploring has your character explore the world, and you can either find items or run into other characters who can ask you questions or make you play a little minigame to possibly increase your stats. Resting restores some of your HP, but wastes a whole day. On top of that, anything that isn't explicitly training will cause your stats to slowly decrease over time. So the whole idea is that you're playing this game of balancing increasing your stats while also trying to keep your HP as high as you can. I think this is a neat mode, and it's almost like a built-in mini role-playing roguelike thing where you can see just how far you can get in each run, specifically how many days that you can last. It is a bit repetitive after a while, but that doesn't detract from the overall novelty of it. Mission 100 is almost like a mix of the last two games' ultimate battle modes. It's a mode with 100 themed team battles, so it has that 100 fight element, but each fight is also like a course from the last game, albeit without as many of the course conditions. Finally, there's survival mode. This one puts you in a long series of fights, but your health doesn't fully recover between each one. It works about how you'd expect a survival mode to work, making it almost like a slightly less spruced up Mission 100 or something. Something that I missed last time, and a ton of people pointed it out, is the disc fusion feature, and I can't believe I didn't mention it because this is actually really cool. If you put in the disc for the first and second Tenkaichi games in this menu, it unlocks special modes based on their ultimate battle modes called Ranking Battle and Course. This is a really neat way of rewarding players who stuck with the series over time, though I probably didn't know about it until now because I was unfortunately one of those kids who had to trade in games to get new games, meaning that unless this game supported, I don't know, a copy of Chaos Legion, there was no way I was gonna even know about this feature. Dragon World Tour is the central hub for all of the tournament modes. The ones we've seen so far have returned, but there's the addition of two more options, Otherworld Tournament and Yamcha Game. The ability to play these tournaments for rewards is gated to an in-game timer, meaning that only certain tournaments are available at certain times, though I was able to change the time by just backing out of the menu and going back in. Otherworld Tournament is a tournament mode hosted by the Alien Announcer. This one features mainly opponents from Otherworld, and includes mostly non-canon movie and GT characters along with, dead characters. Yamcha Game, hosted by Yamcha and Puar, is a standard tournament with random opponents, but the big catch is that not only is your character randomly selected for you, but also their Z item loadout and their costume. While you could do something similar on your own by just, pressing the random button or selecting a random character, this does have the unique aspect of special hosts, so I think that's pretty neat on its own. Evolution Z is back, and while it works the same as we've seen prior, they've now bundled the item shop inside the mode. Every Z item now has a cost associated with it, and each character has a cost limit, so even if you have more slots available, you still can't exceed the cost limit. You can now equip strategy types, and I think that this is similar to the logic thing from the last game, but this one makes a lot more sense since each strategy is named after a specific character and has a clear explanation. The items themselves have more straightforward effects this time, and almost every item that isn't a flat stat boost seems to have some kind of trade-off. So you can't just buff a character with a bunch of overpowered god items without some kind of trade-off, and I think that's a nice way to balance it out a bit if you're someone who cares about power balance in Dragon Ball games. Duel mode returns, and as you probably expected, it includes player versus player, player versus CPU, and CPU versus CPU modes. When setting up a match, you have the option for a single battle, team battle, and a new DP battle, where your team has a limit to their combined destruction points assigned to each character on the select menu. You can have up to 10 characters on your team, meaning that there's actually a fun little layer of strategy here. Obviously, more powerful characters will take up more points, but maybe you're confident that you want more numerous weaker characters. But maybe you're more confident and want a bunch of weaker characters. While this isn't that fun from a single player standpoint, I imagine this is probably a lot more fun for local multiplayer fights. It introduces a sort of self-balancing aspect that lets players craft their own teams that may or may not be viable. Finally, we've got this game's museum/gallery/character reference mode. Every listing has a character introduction, voice playback, Chi-Chi's commentary, and the model viewer. The model viewer is a lot nicer and actually puts the character in a full 3D environment. Plus, you can look at different costumes of each character too, and I think this is the prime version of this mode from a presentation standpoint, and I don't really know how it could be improved from here, especially since the best part about this is Chi-Chi's commentary. She has unique dialogue for every character, and it's basically just her talking shit about either them or Goku the entire time. Just flawless execution, and it's super entertaining. Overall, I'd have to say that Tenkaichi 3 is probably my favorite of the first three games, though there are some elements that I do wish it retained from Tenkaichi 2, mainly the fun overworld map stuff. Still, 3 evolves the presentation and improves a bunch of little things, and while a direct comparison of each change feels like they didn't move the needle too much, the sum of all the improvements does make Tenkaichi 3 feel like the best we've seen so far. In the middle of making this video, it was announced that the Dragon Ball series creator Akira Toriyama passed away on March 1st, 2024. If you've watched my channel for a while, or you even take a look at my channel, you can probably really easily tell that Dragon Ball is incredibly special to me, and it's probably, based on how many people watched my Dragon Ball videos, incredibly special to a lot of you too. It's been something that's brought me joy pretty much my whole life, and that's thanks to the creativity, passion, and dedication of the creator of the series, Akira Toriyama. There's not really enough words to describe how much of an influence he was on both the people that enjoy his work and also the entertainment industry as a whole. I probably would go as far as to say that the battle shonen genre as it exists today wouldn't really exist without him. A lot of you already probably know this, but a lot of manga and anime were partially or even directly inspired by Dragon Ball, including stuff like Naruto and One Piece. And, of course, his work wasn't just limited to Dragon Ball. Look at stuff like Dragon Quest or Chrono Trigger. There's so much stuff that he was involved in. It is actually ridiculous how much of a force he was. I'm in this really lucky, fortunate position in that I can experience his work in multiple mediums, especially video games, and I can share it with you all and see your responses to it and your reactions and see how passionate you all are about it too, and I think that keeps him alive, in a way. His memory stays alive through the work he left behind and the people that are still enjoying it. And I hope people continue to enjoy it because he really was incredible. It's a timeless and incredible thing that he left behind, but I digress. What really matters is that he has left behind such an incredible legacy, and I don't think I've ever seen such a huge outpouring of grief and love for someone like on social media after they passed away, at least not someone that was like a manga artist, you know? And it's just, I'm so happy that we all still get to experience his work and that he still has work that's unreleased that's still gonna come, like Dragon Ball Daima. And I'm rambling at this point, but I just want to say, he can't see this, but thank you, Toriyama. Everything that you've done has really had an impact on my life and the life of so many others. Let's get back to the video. Dragon Ball Z Tenkaichi Tag Team, called Dragon Ball Tag Versus in Japan, was released for the PlayStation Portable. Unfortunately, this game doesn't have a pre-rendered intro. What it does have, though, is a unique visual style that looks distinctly different from the last few games, but is still really good to me. The best way I can describe it is that it's less of a cel-shaded look and more of a flat, cartoony look with a dash of the cel shading. There is clearly a small downgrade to stuff, like the lack of battle-damaged outfits, and a downgrade in general to facial animation in that it's completely gone, but you only really notice that in the pre-fight dialogue anyways. The character roster is a bit smaller too, but given that this is on the PSP of all things, I can imagine it's probably due to some kind of data constraint or something. The menus are animated in a different way than we've seen before, closer to almost traditional animation, like Gohan training with his sword in the battle guide menu, or Vegeta and Trunks in the free battle menu. This is a fun little spin on the menus, and while it's a bit less busy and in your face, I almost prefer this to the dynamic moving images from the previous games. This game pulls off a feat that I would never usually expect from a smaller scale adaptation of a series, and that's somehow bringing the Tenkaichi gameplay to the PSP almost entirely unchanged. Aside from a few tiny controls adjustments to make up for the lack of shoulder buttons, this game feels nearly identical to play coming from the PS2 versions. I find this really impressive and a technical feat that could not have been easy to pull off. There are some gameplay changes though, the most obvious and important one being that there can now be up to 4 combatants split between the 2 teams on the battlefield at once. This naturally comes with some new team battle mechanics, including a dedicated way to switch between targeting the 2 opponents at any time. While the battles largely play out the same, just with multiple targets, there's some new team-specific mechanics that allow you and your partner to increase your overall effectiveness. For example, you can follow up on your partner's combos with your own dragon rushes and chases, and performing actions at the same time can actually boost the strength of those actions, like key charges and super attacks. You can tell when you're getting a team boost because both characters will start glowing slightly with a blue glow, and typically it happens when they're in close proximity to each other. There's also this new sensu bean mechanic. Depending on the mode, teams are given a set number of sensu beans, and if a character gets defeated, they can get revived at the cost of a sensu bean, though sensu beans are shared amongst the team. So if one character goes down early and there's only one sensu bean, that's it. No more second chances for that team. They're basically lives. I get why they added this though. Without it, your partner could go down super early and then you'd just get totally bullied for the rest of the fight by yourself. That'd put you at a pretty big disadvantage really quickly. And let me tell you, the AI is definitely not afraid of bullying you. Usually there's two distinct fights going on at a time where one character focuses on another, but sometimes an AI enemy will just completely ignore your teammate and focus on you too. Honestly though, while this new tag team stuff is kind of a fundamental change to how battles can play out, it really doesn't feel that much like a game changer when you're actually playing the game. As far as non-tag team changes, I didn't notice all that much outside of the controls adjustments, but there is this new mashing struggle mechanic when a character uses an ultimate blast, where you mash the circle button to maximize the attack's power. But you're up against the opponent, so it turns into a bit of tug of war where they can increase their defense against the attack too. I think that while the tag team stuff is novel and a fun way to set this apart from the standard games, it probably could use more fleshing out. There is some integration with the item system, but I think they could have gone even further with it if the game ever got, I don't know, a direct sequel, which it didn't. Tenkaichi already had fusions, but imagine something like What If fusions with your tag team characters with cool hybrid abilities and enhanced power-ups to make up for the loss of a second person. The modes in this game are Dragon Walker, Battle Selection, Free Battle, Multiplayer, Customize, and Training. Dragon Walker is yet another fun name for the story mode. This story is a pretty straightforward chapter select, and it doesn't really do anything super notable, but given that this is a PSP title, I'm not quite expecting the production value of a full console game anyways. Inside the chapters themselves, there's a voice narration and sometimes accompanying artwork from the show during the scenes, but all of the actual action takes place on this sort of scaled down version of an overworld map like we saw in Tenkaichi 2. This time it's an overhead perspective with super deformed characters. The map isn't huge or anything, but you can still fly around and explore to an extent. Depending on the chapter, the map has essential story fights that move the progression along, but sometimes optional fights too. You can attack optional battlers on the map, but in my experience, this didn't seem to actually do anything meaningful outside of knocking them away. If you take on a main fight and it's a standard story scenario, there's a short fully voiced dialogue exchange before each fight, but that's about the extent of the cutscenes. A funny note though is that a lot of the scenarios have you defeating multiple enemies to complete the chapter, and when you defeat a main enemy and you haven't completed the rest of the fights, that enemy you defeated just kinda lays on the map. This isn't important or anything, it's just there's something goofy about it that I think is super funny. Anyway, some scenarios have an unlockable secondary what if version that you can choose inside the scenario. These have a bit of a different approach to what we've seen previously with what ifs in that they're almost the exact same as the main scenarios, just repurposed to change the featured characters and dialogue around. They still play out with nearly identical story beats and almost identical fights, and they're not quite as fleshed out as the same scenarios that they're based on, but it's nice that they're here as a little extra bonus. This story mode isn't really anything I'd write home about, but I do think it's good enough for being on the PSP. I think they were going for a bit of a stripped down vibe of Tenkaichi 2, and adding in the super deformed aesthetic makes it a bit more charming. I don't necessarily feel the need to explore all that much, but I still prefer this to just selecting fights on a menu. Battle Selection mode is this game's take on the Ultimate Battle mode and includes Battle 100, Survival, and Score ranking. Battle 100 is a similar premise to what we've seen before, but this time all of the matches are laid out on a grid, and of course, there's team battles this time around. Some battles have extra bonus challenges that you can complete inside the battle, like using certain tactics a minimum number of times, on top of extra bonuses for higher overall scores. Multiplayer mode is an ad hoc wireless multiplayer where you can take on other players locally or do co-op battle selection fights. I didn't get to try this mode, but it's cool that it exists to take advantage of one of the PSP's more unique features. Free battle mode is the game's dual mode, but obviously only player versus CPU. You're able to select a team composition of 1v1, 1v2, 2v1, or 2v2. After the character selection, you can also select how many sensu beans each team has along with the stage. Customization mode is pretty much what we've come to expect at this point, but with the addition of some fun co-op bonus items. These increase the effectiveness of co-op actions or do things like increase the stats of one character when another character's hurt. Actually, equipping the items works like we saw in Tenkaichi 3, but now you can equip items from multiple categories, with only ability-specific items counting against your actual ability limit. Tenkaichi Tag Team is kind of its own thing. I don't think it's super fair to compare it to a full home console release or say it's necessarily worse or anything, because that's kind of a big ask. That being said, what is here captures the essence of the home console games almost perfectly, and picking it up after playing those felt totally natural. I never felt like I had to relearn anything outside of the new game mechanics, though I did miss the gigantic character rosters, but again, it's a PSP game and a pretty good one at that. If you're itching for more classic feeling Tenkaichi but the PS2 games aren't doing it for you, I definitely recommend giving Tag Team a shot. Dragon Ball Raging Blast was released for the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360, and while it's not called Budokai Tenkaichi or Sparking, it's made by the same developer and retains a lot of the same gameplay concepts. The intros are back, and this time we've got full parody with the Japanese music tracks in the North American release. I'd say the visual style of this intro is a neat hybrid of the style that we saw before, where it's cel-shaded with almost an oil covering on the characters, but not quite. The in-game visuals are a bit different too. For starters, this game is built from the ground up for a fully HD console, so the general model detail is nicer along with the effects and auras. The shading is about what you'd expect for a cel-shaded anime game with super bright colors and real thin outlines. They've gone for an entirely new style with the menus, moving away from the 2D dynamic animated stuff and instead opting for a few different 3D environments, most notably on the main menu. I like how the menu is presented, but it is a bit less useful than a standard list menu after the initial novelty wears off. Moving into gameplay, the controls have been adjusted a bit, but I think they're an improvement overall. Most of the fundamentals feel the same or similar, usually just with a slight button adjustment. It's really easy to adapt to. The specials are now mapped to the right stick, which was kind of a no-brainer in retrospect. Each direction is mapped to a special, with the ultimate blast mapped to clicking the stick in. Additionally, you can now see which transformations are available for your character by holding down a shortcut button. There's a new mechanic where if you have an opponent near a wall, you can launch them into the wall and trap them there for a short time, opening them up to a barrage of blows or special attacks. This is a neat feature, and I may be wrong, but I don't remember this being used in any future DBZ arena fighters outside of Raging Blast, at least not off the top of my head. The gameplay is pretty established at this point, and the formula, while not perfected, is pretty solid overall, but I can't help to feel like this game is missing something from previous Tenkaichi games. It's almost like it's less responsive, I guess. Tenkaichi on the PS2 felt buttery smooth and natural to control, but in this game, I sometimes feel like I'm fighting the game itself more than I'm fighting the opponent, if that makes sense. It just feels overall rough or clunky in a way. I don't know how to describe game feel to someone without them actually just trying the game, because I'm sure this looks totally fine from the footage, and really it is. It's just a super subtle feeling of something being off, I guess. It's not really that big of an issue in the grand scheme. However, what is an issue is the incredibly janky camera behavior. The camera's stuck in a semi-fixed position as you'd expect, but whenever the opponents approach each other at less than ideal angles, the camera just has no idea what to do and it'll get way too close or behind the scenery or just start moving in a super disorienting way. It's kind of frustrating how often this happens, and it's even given me a headache at certain points. The modes in this game are Dragon Battle Collection, ha ha ha, guess what that is, World Tournament, Online Battle, Versus, Super Battle Trial, Museum, Dojo, and Ultimate Customize. Dragon Battle Collection's interface is really nice, and I like the style they went for the sagas. It's these little dioramas of moments and fights from the saga itself. Though these dioramas do infuriate me because I wish they actually existed as real things that I could buy and have and display on a shelf, but the world is just a cruel and punishing place, I guess. When selecting a story mission, you can start the battle, view a story recap, and see the clear conditions. Unfortunately, the storytelling in this game is a bit light, given that you have to seek out the recaps, and the in-battle dialogue is a pretty big step down from Tenkaichi 3's. While the battles play out similarly to how we've seen previously, at least moment to moment, sometimes there'll be this on-screen prompt to perform a specific action, and doing it in the short window it appears in gives you a perfect action bonus for your score at the end of the battle. The introductions to the fights are just like previous Tenkaichi games, standing and talking, but with dynamic camera angles at the very least. Nothing fancy or world-changing here, but it works well enough. I'm glad there is still in-battle dialogue that plays out over the course of the fights, but I do think it's underwhelming to see the same thing over and over in these games without much evolution. At the same time, I will cut this game a little bit of slack since it is the first one for a new generation of consoles. There are still some nice what-if scenarios in here, and these are my favorite pieces of content in these games since they're arguably more interesting to play through, especially if you already know the normal Dragon Ball story in and out. When you clear a battle for the first time, you unlock missions that you can do whenever you replay the battles. These include things like using certain abilities or clearing the battle on higher difficulties. Each completed mission awards you with a star that can be spent in the Star Shop, which includes costumes, museum, secret BGMs and conversations, and secret battles that are accessible in the various sagas. Versus mode includes single team and power battle. We've actually seen all of these before, including power battle, which is the same thing as the DP battle mode from Tenkaichi 3. You build teams of characters with predefined power levels, and the total sum of the power levels can't exceed the limit. World Tournament returns with an arguably weird interface and works as you'd expect, though it's very annoying in that you can't actually play this mode by yourself. You have to have at least 2 players. And what boggles my mind is that only one player can actually select the participants. On top of that, the order that you select them doesn't seem to even matter. Every matchup is player 1 versus player 2, and it's really difficult to predict what order the characters will appear. Plus, there's no AI battle option at all, at least not that I could access. I think maybe the idea here was that you were supposed to have big groups of a bunch of players passing around controllers or something, but the execution really just feels awkward and half-baked and is not explained at all. In fact, the game actually does this super janky thing where if player 2, the person on the second controller, hits start at the title title screen, they're treated as player 1, and the actual player 1 can't interact with anything, including menus. The only cool thing here in this World Tournament mode is that the Cell games are commentated by Mr. Satan and his TV crew, which actually makes even more sense than having it narrated by Cell, and it's a fun little detail that feels more true to the story. Still, this is the weakest version of World Tournament in the series so far, especially since there doesn't even seem to be ringouts, which was like half the point. Super Battle Trial is this game's take on the special modes, including arcade, survival, and time attack modes. There's some unlockable modes, but I don't think it's anything we haven't already seen in some form at this point. Ultimate Customize is this game's replacement for the Z item system, and the options are Customized Deck and Super Attack. In Customized Deck, every character has a sort of grid where you can slot in items. It's similar to Z items, but instead of single slots, it's now a sort of Resident Evil inventory Tetris system, where every item takes up a certain number of slots and you have to fit them in. Customized Super Attacks allows you to customize the mappings for different super attacks and also replace them with other super attacks, as the characters usually have more than 4 supers available to them. I'm a bit indifferent on this game's customization, and part of that is probably due to fatigue from all of the customization I've gone through in previous games. I've found myself more and more just sticking to the default characters, but I do think that someone who plays this game in a vacuum will enjoy the changes, especially the ability to customize your supers. Plus, the customization is still necessary for the harder content in the game. Next up is Museum Mode, which obviously includes the character encyclopedia, which is now a staple of the series in my opinion. The presentation has yet another upgrade, and when you inspect the character models, you can actually look at different poses. The character descriptions are back, and I'm pleased to say that not only are they still incredibly detailed, but they've added in sorting tabs with even more detail. This is genuinely impressive and way more work than they had to do for this. In fact, I bet you most people don't even know how intensive this mode is. BGM Collection is a sound and music player. As you listen to the music tracks, you can listen to voice lines between the characters as these little self-contained scenes. These seem to be mostly just lines from the actual story, but it is fun that you can bring these up anytime you want, and some of them are unlockable through various means like the Star Shop. So Raging Blast, at least for me, kind of exists in this limbo of being the first Tenkaichi game to come to a new generation, but not being able to live up to its full potential. It's not a bad game or anything, it's actually a great game, but there's something about it that makes it not that memorable to me. Back when I first made videos covering the series, I thought it was just Burnout, but at this point, I think it's just because this game doesn't really do anything to push the envelope. It's like an echo of the PS2 games that doesn't really try to carve out its own identity. It's good, it just could be better. Dragon Ball Raging Blast 2 was released for the PS3 and Xbox 360. The intro to this game uses the same music as Tenkaichi 2, and I really like this. It's up there as one of my favorites actually because it's one big fight and it doesn't feel like a series of weird disconnected scenes like some of the more recent ones have. In-game, the visuals have a very similar quality to the last game as far as the character models and overall detail, but it has a distinctly different art style to the last game, and it's 100% down to the cell shading. This goes for a less cell-shaded look, opting for more realistic shadows and highlights in a lot of cases, and a lot of the surfaces, especially clothes and hair, have this shiny, almost glossy look to them. I honestly don't really have much of a preference between the two styles, but I do think this one's colors are a lot more rich and vibrant in general, just a bit less cartoony overall. The in-game HUD is nearly identical though. While the janky camera isn't totally fixed here, it's definitely been improved quite a bit, and there's now special camera angles for charged impacts from normal attacks that happen throughout the battle. This could easily have been annoying and distracting, but it's actually done in a smooth and tastefully restrained way, and it makes the game feel more cinematic overall. This is a welcome change for me, and I'd be happy to see it in any future game of this style. The menus have been greatly simplified, and while they're not as stylish, they're way more functional, and I think that's an overall improvement at the end of the day. They still look good, even if they're not doing anything fancy. I will be honest, I do kinda miss characters yelling at me though. The moment-to-moment gameplay feels really similar to the first Raging Blast, but something here, and I don't know exactly what, I told you this would be a running thing, it just feels better overall. It could partially be the improved camera, or it could be some secret sauce that they've added or adjusted between the games. I'm sure someone with more in-depth knowledge of the mechanics could explain it, but unlike the last game, I never feel like I'm fighting the game more than I'm fighting the opponent. As far as new features go, there's one big one in the form of Raging Soul mode, an optional mode you can activate when you fully charge your ki. In Raging Soul, your overall strength and stats seem to be increased, but by default, you can't use any special abilities or ultimate attacks. Nor can you dash at an opponent with ki, you can only do these like flash teleport steps. Also, this could have been in the last game, but I only ever encountered it in this game. In the single player modes, battles with enemy teams can trigger this QTE type event where the characters teleport around, and you have to press the button prompts in time to win the interactions. At the end, a new character tags in, and if you won the QTEs, you get a free hit on them. Overall though, the gameplay in this feels better than the first Raging Blast in general, though it does does kinda suck that there's no story mode, but I'm definitely getting ahead of myself. The modes are single play, battle, online battle, world tournament, ultimate customize, and museum. Single play includes Galaxy Mode, Battle Zone, Tutorial, and Training. Galaxy Mode is the game's primary focus for single player content, and it's not quite a story mode, but it's also not a story mode, kind of? Let me explain the mode first. Every character in the game has their own set route, and each route contains a series of battles on a branching path against one or more opponents. The battles all have different difficulty levels, and each battle can have specific mission requirements and modifiers, like the enemy becoming stronger over the course of the fight, player HP automatically reducing, among many other possible options. During some battles, there's optional tasks that you can complete, again called perfect actions. It works differently though in that these actions have to be completed one at a time in order before the battle is over. They include things like hitting a certain number of combos, using certain moves, you know the drill. The big catch with these is the fact that they have to be done in a specific order and all in one battle, making them a bit more interesting and sometimes challenging than some of the actions we've seen in previous games like this. Some perfect actions actually aren't even possible until you've unlocked certain things in other character paths, like transformations and abilities, which incentivizes you to come back and retry certain missions later and also gives you a reason to attempt everyone's path. When you clear a battle, you can earn various bonuses like character costumes, equipable items, characters, and museum items. Additionally, battles connected to that path on the path are unlocked and you can play those. Completing some scenarios can also unlock more scenarios on different characters' paths, meaning that even if you've completed all possible missions for a character, you can still unlock more missions for that character from progressing with other characters. At the end of a character's path, there's a boss enemy, and usually defeating that enemy unlocks that character. There's also sometimes additional paths beyond the boss enemy too. I like Galaxy Mode, and I think the way missions are structured is fun and engaging. Being able to tackle scenarios and missions in the order that I want based on the difficulty and how much I can mitigate the conditions through item buffs makes progressing and experimenting feel kind of rewarding. It's a very good mode that actually makes this game worth playing alone, if you ask me. That being said, I still really am missing a story mode, and there's definitely room in this game for a story mode with Galaxy Mode, even if the story was as simple as just porting over the last game's story mode with this game's gameplay and presentation improvements. But this mode also weirdly includes a lot of the in-battle dialogue, even though there isn't any of the normal story cutscene stuff here. Now, I don't know if this was an intentional choice for more immersion and fun dialogue for the player, or if this mode possibly was originally meant to be a story mode and the developer just changed course for whatever reason. The fact that this game doesn't have a traditional story mode is odd to me, because this is the only game in the series that doesn't include one, but maybe it really was an intentional decision. Battle Zone is the second main single-player mode, and this is a series of battle sets similar to the kind of Battle 100 ultimate battle modes we saw in previous games. Every fight can be cleared normally, but there's optional conditions that you can clear similar to perfect actions. These are more focused on having certain items equipped or unequipped or using certain skills though. I find Battle Zone pretty forgettable though, mostly because everything Battle Zone does, Galaxy Mode does better. I'm gonna sound like a broken record, but if the game had a standard story mode with Battle Zone as a secondary mode, I might feel different about it, but honestly, its inclusion just feels like retreading the same thing. World Tournament mode is actually playable with one player, a huge improvement, and it makes it feel more like the older Tenkaichi games. The customization system is back, and it's similar to Z items, which I actually prefer. There's a point limit system in place, literally called limit points, and these can be increased through using the character in Galaxy Mode, and the items are unlocked through clearing routes in Galaxy Mode and Battle Zone. These items include the standard stuff you expect, like boosts to certain ability types and passive bonuses, but there's also some advanced items. These can upgrade certain abilities or even reduce stats, but with the benefit of raising your total available limit points. Some items only apply to Galaxy Mode and have effects like preventing certain challenge conditions like near-death start or auto health reduction effects in some missions. Museum Mode includes the character encyclopedia, BGM collection, battle replays, picture viewer, and movie viewer. There's not a whole lot of new things to note for most of these options, except that the character encyclopedia unfortunately no longer includes a 3D model viewer. But there is a big inclusion here in the form of a full animated feature called Dragon Ball Plan to Eradicate the Super Saiyans. This is an OVA from 2010 that's actually a full remake of an older OVA from 1993, which itself was an adaptation of a card-based Dragon Ball game for the Famicom. The main villain of this story is Hachiyak, who makes a playable appearance in this game if you watch the OVA. I obviously can't really show much of this movie, but it's the original Japanese dub and the animation is incredibly high quality. It's kind of wild that this random video game includes a full Dragon Ball OVA remade from scratch that was made specifically for the game. So overall, I almost feel like Raging Blast 2 isn't supposed to exist? I know that probably sounds crazy, but let me explain. This game feels almost like a DLC or addition to Raging Blast 1, or maybe scraps from the cutting room floor glued together and made as a new product, yeah, there's some new features and improvements, and it does feel better to play, but the single-player content almost feels supplementary, rather than what was supposed to be the main focus, like it was supposed to be the second mode to a main mode. Again, the game does feel better to play, I can assure you of that, it's just that it feels incomplete feature-wise. I want to emphasize, I really like Raging Blast 2. In fact, back in the day, I totally missed out on the first Raging Blast. 2 was my first post-PS2 Tenkaichi experience. The Galaxy mode is genuinely a lot of fun, and it's pretty full of content, but it's also the only mode with real meat. There's a pretty big roster of characters to play, and online play is an option, but for someone like me who's mainly focused on single-player content, that's kind of a letdown in the long run. Dragon Ball Z Ultimate Tenkaichi, called Ultimate Blast in Japan, was released for the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360. This is the final quote-unquote Tenkaichi game, but we'll get to that. The intro is shockingly a completely original brand new animation that includes a custom character. It uses the original Chala Head Chala in the North American release too. In fact, there's quite a few fully animated scenes sprinkled throughout the game. I don't want to spend too much time showing them since I don't want to get copyright striked, but I do want to say that I absolutely love it when games do this kind of thing. The only other licensed games I can think of that have totally unique hand-drawn animations like this are some of the Naruto Ultimate Ninja Storm games, which I've covered on this channel, by the way. If you know of any other game series that do this, please let me know in the comments, because I love playing games like this. Visually, this game moves to a sort of stylized, cel-shaded look that falls somewhere in between the two Raging Blast games. The characters all have outlines and the colors are vivid, but also everything seems more textured in general. The stages have more detailed geometry in the backgrounds, but way less clutter in the actual playable area. I actually think the game looks great, and the visuals are enhanced by a cool new realistic stage deformation system, where the energy blasts can carve out huge ravines that stay on the stage for the duration of the fights. The stages just feel huge in general too. The actual in-fight presentation's super nice too. The game always has this sense of intense action, with dramatic camera angles, flashy effects, and cool fight interactions. Overall, this game nails presentation and would be the prime example of how to make a Dragon Ball game, if it didn't have some of the most bafflingly bad gameplay I have ever experienced. Remember all that really fun and awesome stuff you could do in previous games with dynamic combos, switching it up between different attack types, tossing out special moves at any range to keep your opponent on their toes? You know, that kind of fun stuff? The stuff that makes it a video game? Yeah, just toss all of that out the window, because this game just turns fights into glorified coin toss QTE cutscenes. You can still freely move your character around, but if you're far away from the opponent, you're in what's called blast range. If you're close up, you're in what's called melee range. In blast range, you can fire ki blasts and use special attacks and ultimates, and in melee range, you can use physical attacks and ultimates, but not special attacks. That doesn't sound too bad until you find out that using any basic combo puts you into a full QTE sequence, where you have to select one of two attack buttons. If the person who initiated the attack picks a different button than the person being attacked, the attack succeeds and the QTE continues. If they pick the same button, the person being attacked negates the attack and hits the attacker instead. Yep, the entire game boils down to, quite literally, a series of 50-50 coin toss interactions without any real player input or agency outside of random chance coin tosses. It wouldn't even be that bad if you could mix it up with special attacks and melee range or something, but you can't. And to get out of melee range, you have to expend ki and are forced into an entirely different coin toss interaction that can damage you if you lose. All player agency is stripped away in favor of what is almost a glorified movie, and if the player tries to even take any semblance of control, there's basically a 50-50 chance of punishment, and it makes it a real negative feedback loop. Sometimes when the opponent uses certain rush attacks, you can activate different defense reactions based on how much ki you have, and I'd give them credit for giving you some kind of control here, but that's immediately counterbalanced by the fact that if someone initiates a beam special successfully, the other character makes no attempt to avoid it and just stands there and lets it hit them in a full cutscene. I'd normally love how goofy this is when it happens, but it really just ends up feeling like a middle finger, because it reminds you that you have absolutely no control whatsoever of these fights, and you're basically just a glorified spectator. There's so much more I could rant about here, like how your HP bar isn't actually a bar, but a color-changing orb, or how you only have access to 3 total special moves at any given time, or a plethora of other things, but I think you get the idea. I can feel myself getting upset, so I'm gonna cool off for a second, maybe have some food. Just give me a second. Ah, much better. To play devil's advocate for a moment, I will defend this frankly baffling gameplay style in that it is really pretty to look at. It looks really nice, and if you're someone who isn't really great at video games, it does make you feel like you're doing a whole lot, even if all you're doing is tapping square every 1 second like I am in the footage that you're seeing. But I can see the appeal of that for someone who isn't much of a gamer or doesn't want that much of a challenge and just wants to see cool flashy fights. But in that case, why call this game Tenkaichi, let alone Ultimate Tenkaichi? I know there's some kind of fan survey or whatever for the game's name, but man, calling this game Tenkaichi sets the expectation that you're gonna get that very unique style of gameplay, not whatever this is. Again, I can see an audience for this, and if it was called anything but Tenkaichi, it might have been a bit easier to stomach for me, but it's such a bummer. The modes in Ultimate Tenkaichi are Story Mode, Hero Mode, Battle Mode, World Tournament Mode, Customize, Online Battle, Capsule House, and Training. Hero Mode is the first of the 2 story modes, and it features an entirely custom-created character, though your only option for character races is Saiyan. When making your character, you can choose body sizes of Standard, Light, or Heavy. Standard is balanced and can learn a variety of moves, Light has a focus on blast range and is limited in the moves that it can learn, and Heavy is focused on melee range and is also limited in the moves it can learn. The general customization options are also super limited, at least when you're first making your character, with only a couple of hairstyles and clothing options. What's nice though is that the voice that you choose does have unique full voice acting in the story, which definitely took a lot more work than having just one generic voice. They have unique voices for every interaction. The story is a multiverse story, and it almost feels like a proto-Xenoverse story. The protagonist is your custom character, and they have unique dialogue and some pretty entertaining and well-written cutscenes. Also, it's a very loose narrative structure and includes an actual world map that you can explore in the air, sort of like Tenkaichi 2. This time though, you can sometimes see what's happening on the overworld map, like seeing a great ape go on a rampage before you battle it. After every match, your stats increase and you level up on a stat-by-stat basis, with their overall level indicated by a level rank, and the cutscenes, again, are really nicely done. The presentation in this mode is super solid, and they really knocked it out of the park. Normally, I'd be super excited about this, but again, this gameplay is so atrocious, and it makes anything nice I could say feel pointless. The regular story mode has a similar structure to the hero mode with the overworld map and everything, and it covers the basic Dragon Ball story. World Tournament mode is here, and it works pretty similarly to how it did in Raging Blast 2. Capsule House is the museum mode, and there's a streamlined character encyclopedia that includes 3D models and character profiles and voices. It is a bit of a downgrade though, because you can only see the characters in one pose and at kind of a distance. I can find so many redeeming qualities in this game, but the sum of all of its best parts still don't come even close to the blunder that is the actual gameplay. Honestly, I was dreading this game when I decided to remake this video, but I figured I'd try my best to go in with an open mind. Unfortunately, I just came out even more frustrated than the first time. The game has such an amazing presentation and production value. It's just a shame that it's so hands-off and bland and just not fun to play, especially when it shares a name with a series known for its fantastic in-depth gameplay. The best thing I can say about this game is that if you want a game that you can pick up and play with grandma that she won't struggle too much with, this might be an option. Dragon Ball Z for Kinect was released for the Xbox 360 and is a game that actually exists. If you don't know what the Kinect is, it's a camera attachment for the Xbox that allows you to use your body as the controller. And while it's not very popular today, it was very mainstream for the latter years of the Xbox 360 and the first few years of the Xbox One. Before I start, I need you to know that I bought this game secondhand and I am devastated that I couldn't get the goofy Goku hair that came with some of the pre-orders. I'm so sorry to disappoint you all, and as a plea for forgiveness, here's a totally legitimate photo of me with Goku's hair, undoctored, totally real, naturally taken 5 minutes ago. I assume this game was built on top of Ultimate Tenkaichi because it looks strikingly similar in its visuals, with the same shading style, stage deformation, and overall aesthetic. But also, once you see the gameplay, the similarities start to quickly pile up. The game is a first-person arena brawler where all of the movements you make are translated to the character you're using in-game. You can see that as I flail my arms around, so does the character. However, really, this is just for show because the game is more looking for specific movements and poses, like punches, dodges, and specific arm movements to activate specials and block. In general, the game tries to emulate the movements that you'd actually use in this universe, like needing to throw your arm back and forward to fire off a ki blast, or putting your hand in the air and waving it down in a big arc to use Krillin's Destructo Disc. There's also movements for dodging, knocking away opponents' ki blasts, and charging toward the opponent. If you try to use a special move without enough ki, using the first stance will automatically make you start charging your ki until you have enough. Then you're prompted to use the second stance to try to activate the ability. Now note that I said try to activate the ability because in my experience it usually just did nothing. I don't know if my play space is just too small, or if my lighting was bad, or if the Kinect Kinect just isn't as good as I remember, but while it read my punches totally fine, any kind of specific poses or movements were a total crapshoot. Plus, I think the game accounts for whether or not your legs are visible because some of the counters and guard QTEs had a kick option, but they were blocked off and I couldn't get my Kinect to actually recognize me unless it was only pointed at the top half of my body. I have to wonder if the responsiveness of special moves would have been better if I'd been able to use the whole body tracking, but I legitimately couldn't figure it out. I was at this for a while. But even with technical issues, the game is eerily similar to Ultimate Tenkaichi in that it's mostly just QTEs, kind of call and response. The main difference being that instead of buttons, you're moving your body. The visuals are still really nice, but the fundamental issues with Ultimate Tenkaichi can still be felt here, just this time seemingly without the ability to play with friends. The modes in this game are a story mode broken down into sagas, score attack, a mode where you can replay story missions to go for a high score, card reader mode, and special movie. I'm not going to go into too much detail in the story modes, they're just the same story adapted in the way that we've seen them a bunch of times, but with Kinect gameplay for the fights. Card reader mode allows you to scan special QR code cards that include pre-made customized characters to use in the score attack mode. I bought the game secondhand and unfortunately didn't get these codes, or the dumb Saiyan hair, so I found some of the codes online and printed one of them out to test it. Finally, there's the special movie mode. Similar to Raging Blast 2, this game includes an entire animated movie, this time episode of Bardock. Really neat stuff, though I was unable to actually find a way to stop playing the movie once it started, leading me to have to close the entire game to get back to the main menu. I don't want to call this a bad game because I truly don't think I even got the intended experience. What I did experience was not at all what I'd call fun and felt more like an even further dumbed down version of Ultimate Tenkaichi though. Had the controls or tracking or whatever you want to call it been more responsive, I might feel a little bit better about it, but as it is, at least if you have the same kind of smaller environment as I do, I couldn't recommend this, especially if you can't get the dumb Goku hair. Dragon Ball Zenkai Battle or Zenkai Battle Royale was released exclusively in arcades in Japan. On the surface, this looks like a normal Tenkaichi game, but the gameplay feels very different and is simplified, but thankfully not in the way Ultimate Tenkaichi handled it. Visually, this is kind of a mixture between the cel-shaded look and a realistic approach, opting for no character outlines and some pretty realistic shading and highlights. It's almost approaching something like Jump Force, but stopping just short of looking too realistic or in the uncanny valley. What really strikes me is just how detailed the environments are, especially when most of these games seem to deliberately opt for very basic looking environments. As for gameplay, the overall goal and win condition is for you and, depending on the match, your co-op partner to defeat the opponents a set number of times to win the match. It's structured really similarly to Tenkaichi Tag Team actually, even down to the Senzu Bean mechanic returning, just without the, Senzu Beans, it's just lives. The controls are where the simplicity lies. You can move in any direction, but if you hold forward, you automatically chase the opponent at the cost of some ki, leading to the movement feeling kind of limited, but likely on purpose for the sake of simplicity in an arcade. You have a basic attack that you can string into combos with one button, and another button guards, and guarding works like Super Smash Bros. Weirdly enough. Your guard can be broken after taking enough hits, and it's all indicated by the color of your guard aura bubble thing. In addition to basic attacks, you can grab opponents, but some opponents like Broly are immune to grabs. Special moves are activated with their own button, and the move that you use depends on what direction you're holding down. For Goku, there's a Kamehameha ability that you can charge up to deal more damage, along with a Kaioken ability, which is a rush attack. His ultimate ability is the Spirit Bomb, which actually has to be used twice, once to initially gather energy to charge it, and once to actually throw it at the opponent. A fun detail is that if you use this too close to the ground, it actually damages Goku too. There's one last attack type in the form of cooperative charge attacks that seem to only trigger during specific fights with a partner. In my case, these only happened against Broly, who is considered a boss fight on this route. The game is broken up into specific routes that are played stage by stage at the cost of 1 credit each. However, as you've probably noticed, I've only been playing as Goku this entire time, and that's because this game is incredibly limited if you don't have access to the Bandai Namco Passport card, shortened to Bana Passport. See, while this game is an arcade-only game, it's based on the PlayStation 3's hardware and can be run in a limited capacity on a PlayStation 3 emulator. However, these Bana Passport cards are not emulated, at least not at the time of this video, and these are how the game actually tracks player progress. A lot of Japanese arcade games store player data on servers, and the player's profile is identified through these cards. Unfortunately for this game, if you're not using a Bana Passport, the game is limited to what is essentially a demo trial mode where only one route is available and the only playable character is Goku. It shows that you can unlock characters and customization items, but the progress isn't saved unless you're using a Bana Passport. This is pretty unfortunate because there's a lot of playable characters in this game with their own unique playstyles and special moves, and you can find footage and websites online showcasing the characters. They're in the game, they're just inaccessible right now. I have found some people online who are digging into workarounds for exploring more of the game, and most efforts seem to be kind of stalled. The furthest it seems we can go is unlocking other routes, which allows you to play on more stages and against more characters, but you're still stuck as Goku. The only exception to playing as Goku, kind of, is a demo mode on the title screen that gives you access to Super Saiyan Blue Goku, but this mode literally only lasts a few seconds and you're not able to use any special abilities, so it may as well not count. If you want to see a slightly more in-depth look at the game, I actually made a dedicated video on it a while back, so definitely check that out if you're interested. If there's ever any big developments that make the game more playable or let us play as more characters, I'll definitely revisit it on my channel. For now though, all we can do is wait and hope that the community eventually finds a way. So I originally made this video because I'm incredibly excited for the return of the Tenkaichi series through Sparking Zero, and I really wanted to revisit the games before that comes out. I think looking back at these games versus similar arena battlers like Xenoverse puts into perspective just how much the Tenkaichi games did right, as it feels like a lot of the newer games try to emulate how these games felt in their prime. I'd argue that nothing has ever felt quite like the PS2 games since, and I really hope that Sparking Zero can reignite that feeling while also bringing in some fresh elements to really drive it forward. I don't want Sparking Zero to be a one-off rehash of stuff we've already seen, though it will be nice to officially have Dragon Ball Super content in a Tenkaichi game. Either way, I will be covering Sparking Zero on the channel when it comes out, so keep an eye out for that too. Until then, I want to give a huge shout out to my patrons, including That's Ash and Hey It's Megoku in the Play It Every Game tier, along with all of these absolute legends that you see on your screen. And of course, thank you for watching this video. I'll see you in the next one, and as always, have a fantastic day.